military personnel creates a separate set of rules than what the White House has pushed for civilian healthcare workers. I want to turn to our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. We'll also bring in Dr. Frank Esper, infectious disease specialist. I think, Barbara, we'll obviously start with you there at the Pentagon. Why this double standard, different set of guidelines?
Good morning. This was expected. Everybody'd been waiting for it. What the secretary has ordered is a quarantine for everybody. But they don't really even know at this point how they're going to do it. They're going to take 15 days to figure out how to implement it. Where do they put people? How do they monitor them? Nobody has the answers to any of that. And then in 45 days, they're going to review and see if it's really necessary. So why are they doing this?
Hey, Barbara. Chuck Hagel, Defense Secretary, is speaking about it right now. Let's listen in.
For our men and women who would be returning from West Africa. That policy was put in place by the Chief Staff of the Army a couple of days ago for General Williams and 10 of his associates who are now back at their base in Italy. And what I said in response this morning was, give me within 15 days the operational specifics of how that would work, and then I believe we should review that policy within 45 days. The fact is the military will have more Americans in Liberia than any other department. That's number one. Number two, our people are younger. The cohorts are different. They are not volunteers. And this is also a policy that was discussed in great detail by the communities, by the families of our military men and women, and they very much wanted a safety valve on this. So that's essentially what the directive says.
Great, thank you. So that's the news of the day. Let's talk about some broader pictures. Steve, in his introduction, mentioned all the parts of the world.
All right, that was Chuck Hagel. He's speaking at the Ideas Forum. It's essentially a WONC conference in the Washington, D.C. area, but he just made the announcement talking about this 21-day quarantine for returning military personnel from those 3 West African nations dealing with Ebola right now. Barbara Starr, our Pentagon correspondent, is with us. Barbara, give us some of the context here. Why did we get this announcement today from the Defense Secretary?
Yeah, let's unpack some of this and explain what's really going on behind the scenes here. Several military officials are telling us that it was last Friday in the tank, the secure room in the Pentagon, the chiefs all met and decided they wanted a quarantine. Why did they decide this? What we know now is that they felt they didn't have any new medical data, they had no new scientific data, we are assured of that, but they had a lot of anxieties about all of this. Their feeling was that families were concerned, that some of the military communities were concerned where these troops would be coming back, but really, most importantly to them, large number of young troops, very young people serving on this mission who have no healthcare training, no medical experience. And to be very frank, I have been told by several officials this morning that chiefs were concerned if they left it to be a voluntary monitoring of your temperature, these young troops might not do it. They might just come home, go out with their friends. And basically the chiefs felt they couldn't trust them. That is the very, perhaps, sensitive bottom line here. Secretary Hagel did not want to go the full route of a mandatory 21-day quarantine for everybody. He wanted some caveats on it. He knows the politics. He knows the White House does not want this country basically in a quarantine mode. So he went for the middle ground. He said, okay, you can have it. We'll figure out how to do it. But in 45 days, we're going to review it and really see if it's absolutely necessary. So there is a lot of very high-level internal Pentagon politics here.
Well, and it's so interesting, Barbara, because so many people on our air have talked about the fact that they are having to sort of adapt as we go with this. Dr. Esper, let me turn to you because, you know, we are so quickly reminded by medical experts that we have on our air that we have to the science of this when we're dealing with Ebola. Yet we hear the military reacting essentially to anxiety within their military families and within their personnel. And it feels like a bit of a disconnect. Do you think that's troublesome?
You know, there is a difference between what we see in military versus what we see in civilian.
Fair enough.
When it comes from, infections. What I think that a lot of the Joint Chiefs were reacting to is actually a history of infections within the military, where we actually can see entire forces that are incapacitated just from mild diseases like diarrheal disease or influenza, where it really inhibits their capabilities because these individuals, these brave soldiers, are working in very close quarters, they're living in very close quarters, and they can spread infections much, much easier than individuals who are living in the suburbs and in the cities. So this is something that they had to take into account, a specific certain set of circumstances. And I see that's why they're reacting to it. But it's also important for them, or for us, to realize they're also saying, well, this is how we're starting. We're starting very conservative, but in a few days, we're actually going to revisit this to see whether or not it's needed.
Barbara, I want to bring you back in here because one part of this that I'm fascinated by is the how are they going to do this and what this practically means. You spent a lot of time with the military. I spent my share of time embedded with them also. They don't get places fast a lot of the time. So when does the clock start ticking? Because in some cases, from the moment that they leave West Africa to the time that they might be back with their family members, that might not be much shorter than 21 days.
Yeah, that's a really good point. What we know is while they're in West Africa, their temperature is continually monitored. They're essentially in a military-controlled environment, so their temperature is monitored. They are not getting on a plane to come home if they show any symptoms. They will be asymptomatic getting on that plane. But it's that notion that for the next 21 days, what if they did develop symptoms? And we already know right now, we brought that story to everyone yesterday, that a 2-star general and his team is already in quarantine in Italy. There are going to be 75 of them quarantined in Italy by the end of this weekend. None of them are showing symptoms, but they are ordered by the Army to stay in this building and stay inside. This is a lot of this is going to wind up being driven by practical logistics. You eventually are going to see perhaps 4,000 troops over there. It is going to be very difficult for the U.S. military to put 4,000 people in quarantine. The simple question of where they put them, how they house them, how this would all work is just, for the Pentagon right now, an overwhelming prospect. They actually don't know how they would do it.
So many practicalities to be worked out. Barbara, thank you so much. Quickly, I want to turn to our White House correspondent, Michelle Kaczynski. Interesting.